And with that, we are underway. This is week 3 of general psychology. I am your instructor, Melissa Stockham. And yes, this is what I really look like. And I'm still not up to 100%, so if I cough or whatever, bear with me. So this week we were talking a little bit about personality. What is personality? Personality is, okay, have you ever, back when those of us who have been single or were single, when you're trying to get a friend to go out with somebody, the first question is, well, what do they look like? And when you say they've got a great personality, that means they're ugly as homemade sin, but go out with them anyway. So no, not actually. Personality is an individual person's patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior. It's how we as an individual think. It's how we emote and respond to circumstances, and it is how we behave. We all have patterns of behavior. That's what personality is. The bottom line is we are who we are, whoever that individual might be. There are a lot of theories about personality. In fact, if you look at the various personality theories, if you take a course in personality theories, you get to read all about all of the various theoreticians who basically were the founding fathers, and yes, they were all men at the time, of psychology. The first one we talk about at length is Sigmund Freud, who is considered the father of modern psychology. Sigmund Freud actually started off his career as a medical doctor. Sigmund Freud lived in Vienna, in Austria, in the early 19th century. He wanted to build his career around research. Unfortunately, this was a time in Europe, was a time of horrible anti-Semitism, and Sigmund Freud, himself being a Jew, found his possibilities as a researcher limited because of that anti-Semitism. Nonetheless, he made the best of a bad situation, and he conducted research on the side, usually using information he gleaned from his work as a clinician, a clinical doctor. He noticed that a lot of his patients had what you might call they had a matter in which there were symptoms, but there was no biological basis for those symptoms. So he began to wonder, is there something that's beyond the body, something maybe in the mind that is causing these things? And he eventually developed the theory, the beginning of the psychoanalytic theory. Psychoanalytic theory of personality believes that personality is based upon the individual's struggle to manage anxiety. And of course, Sigmund Freud came up with the 3 elements of the psyche: the id, ego, and superego. The id being that part of our psyche that basically wants gratification of any and all kinds and wants it right now, versus the superego, which are the thou shalt nots of life. Thou shalt not overindulge. Thou shalt not do what everyone wants. Thou shalt have, borders and boundaries and bedtimes. So, for that reason, but what manages between those two? Because those two are obviously going to fight. So what do you have between those? The ego. So the ego is, according to Freud, the most important of the 3 elements of the psyche. Freud developed this theory by looking at all of his patients, and he later determined that we go through 5 stages of development, but we can develop problems. I mean, you've all heard of these. I'm sure you've read the book. The oral stage, where everything is based upon oral gratification. The major crisis there, of course, is weaning. The anal stage, the major crisis there, of course, is toilet training. And if there's a problem there, you can become what is considered the term anal retentive. Saturday Night Live did a hilarious sketch about a couple decades ago about, it's a parody of The Frugal Chef that was called The Anal Retentive Chef, where basically the guy's just so obsessed with cleanliness he never gets anything cooked. The phallic stage, that is the one where Freud said that the child develops an unconscious sexual desire for the opposite sex parent. The Oedipus complex or the Electra complex. and the latency phase, and then when the child develops around 13, that becomes the genital phase where the child can take those urges outward to love and work. So that's Freud in a very tight nutshell. We could talk about Freud. Freud also did a lot of work in looking at the interpretation of dreams, because his patients would oftentimes use their dreams to tell them what's going on in their lives. Sigmund Freud's chief protege was a theoretician named Carl Jung. Carl Jung was also a psychoanalytic thinker, but he looked at it not in terms of anxiety management, but in terms of archetypes. But those are the main psychoanalytic thinkers. You also have the behaviorists. They believe we are who we are because we have learned to be that way. The major ones, of course, are Ivan Pavlov. Ivan Pavlov, of course, was the individual behind, if you take a dog and you pair up food with a light, the dog will naturally salivate. That's an unconditioned response when presented with the food. But if you pair the food with the light long enough, the dog will salivate in the presence of the light. So it's very so based upon that, eventually the dog will salivate only to the light or to the bell or whatever. When I was a kid, my parents had parrots, and when I was a kid, they would have the parrots, and the parrots squawked all the time. And I'm the type of person, when I study, I have to be in my own world of Zen. I cannot have any external noises, and these parrots drove me crazy. So when Mom would want the parrots to go to sleep, she would put a bedspread over the parrot's cage. They had a large cage. She'd put a bedspread over it, and it wasn't a thick bedspread. It was basically like a sheet. But the parrots would know, and Mom would say to them, "Good night, good night, good night." Well, Mom and Dad would go out a lot on Friday nights and leave me at home studying, and I would, the birds would start squawking, and it's like, okay, I cannot even. So I'd go in the room, and not the right thing to do, but I did it. I'd put the sheet over the parrots, and they'd see that sheet, and they'd go, good night, good night, good night. So eventually, they had learned to associate the sheet with good night. So they would say good night because that's what the sheet meant to them. It was an unconditioned response. Once the sheet's over them, they know there's so little light, they're not going to be able to not sleep. So when they'd see that sheet would become good night. Well, then, during the summer break, I was home one weekend, and they had their birds in the master bedroom of their house, which is in the back of their house. One time we were all having a party, and I go to the back of the house to we have a pool. I went to go get a towel for the pool, and they see me, and they're like, good night, good night, good night. I didn't even approach I didn't even approach them, but I didn't approach the parrots, but they saw me, and they had associated me with so many times of pairing with that sheet. It's like, good night, good night, good night. That part I was anyway, I've gotten nicer since then. But, you see, that's how Pavlovian learning works. It's based upon pairings. Versus Skinnerian learning. Skinnerian learning is based upon reinforcements. We learn based upon what we're reinforced with. If we are reinforced, we'll do something more often. There's talk about punishment. Punishment is something that Skinner didn't talk about that much. He believed that punishment was one thing, but all punishment did was kind of mute something, mute the behavior. But reinforcement, either positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement, were what helped with reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is not the same thing as punishment. Negative reinforcement is, let's say, for example, God forbid, you get a shock. Let's say you're in a room and the floor of the room starts having a very heavy shock. And you're freaking out trying to figure out what in the world you're going to do to end this shock. And you find this lever. You push the lever and the shock stops. You're going to hold on to that lever for dear life if that shock is intense enough. Basically, that lever is what's keeping that shock. The shock is what you want to end. So the negative reinforcement is the fact the shock is no longer on your feet. Positive reinforcement is obvious. Rewards of some sort or another. So, and then there's also the trait theory of psychology. That is that our personalities are based upon certain traits or certain percentages of traits. I'm sure most of you have heard of the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. That is a very well used trait-based personality test. It's very easy to give. It's pencil and paper. It's very easy to score, and therefore it's very easy to make pronouncements on. Most companies use a test like either the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator or the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory to make deliberations on where people will best fit in their companies, especially if it's a large Fortune 500 company. If you're making staffing decisions that can cost a company hundreds of thousands of dollars if a bad mistake is made, it's worth the investment of a morning of an individual taking this test to find out where they will best fit into a company. So that's the major personality theories as fast as I can relate most of them to you. Now we talk about stress and health. Stress and health. We now have a better understanding of how stress impacts our health. Before we really did not really have any understanding of stress until I would say approximately the 1970s. We now know what stress is. Stress is the body's reaction to threats placed upon it. Think back to when we were in prehistoric times, not us personally, but our ancestors. Our ancestors were faced with massive threats, like the possibility of being chased by a grizzly bear, or being attacked by a wildebeest, or all manner of climate problems that could have been impacted in one way or another. So the body's reaction to that is basically alarm. We figure out what's going on, reaction, and then the later, if the reaction is or in resistance are prolonged, then we might have problems after that. We don't have to worry about wildebeests anymore. Most of us do not have to worry about bears attacking us. Now, I live in an area where, sadly, I think we've impacted a bear habitat inappropriately, and so we do have bear problems where I live. Whenever I hear about people killing bears, I want to say, you know what? Who took whose habitat? Just saying. But anyway, we now have a better understanding of how stress does impact our health. One of the researchers who first helped us to understand stress was a man named Jenkins. Jenkins was a cardiologist, and he first became interested in this matter because he noticed that he had to keep replacing the credences in his waiting room over and over again because people would sit on the credences at the very edge of their seat. And Jenkins wondered, why is this? Why did and then he realized the people who were coming to see him all had one thing in common. Bear in mind, he was a cardiologist. People were coming to them because of possible heart problems. All these individuals had personality traits that, again, we talked about traits earlier, that impacted their health negatively. They were all highly driven, they were all based on anger, and they all were very goal-directed. All very successful, but nonetheless in line for a heart attack if that's not modulated in some way. They were treating a 5 o'clock deadline on a Friday afternoon like being chased down by a bear. See how that goes? We don't have to worry about the bear, but we have to worry about the 5 o'clock deadline. So Jenkins called those personality traits, the compilation of them, type A. And he said type A individuals are twice as likely to have a heart attack as type B individuals. And now we have what's called the Jenkins Activity Survey, which is again is a paper and pencil test that you can take, and it can tell you if you have type A personality. The other big name in stress and health is Holmes and Rahe. Holmes and Rahe are two researchers who looked at various life stressors. They looked at a series of individuals who had substantial health problems, and they calibrated how many particular major problems in their lives did these individuals have. What major life changes happened during the year, that person's year for the previous year. Everything from death of a spouse, which is considered the most catastrophic, all the way down to traffic tickets, and everything in between. Starting a job, losing a parent, adoption, having a child, major vacation, major illness. And they said, of course, that the more of the, then they can develop what's called the Holmes and Rahe. It's a Holmes and Rahe scale. And basically, you take everyone, you look at the scale, and you look at all the events on it. Everyone, and can take the ones from every year, every year. Forgive me, I'm still kind of tired, woozy from being sick. Every major thing that happened to you during that year, and there's a number by it. You calculate those numbers, and that gives you a score. The greater that score, the more likely you are to get sick during that year. They found out that daily stressors are actually, in the aggregate, more harmful than major catastrophic ones that only happen once. And people handle stressors in different ways. Last year, around June of last year, my mother-in-law passed away. And it was somewhat unexpected. She was old, but we didn't know how close to the end she was. And I remember my husband and I lived in Central Florida. We had to get him up to Philadelphia for to start taking care of matters. I unfortunately had matters in Central Florida I had to handle first, but I was going to fly up days later. So as soon as he finds out the news and he makes arrangements as he needs to, he gets himself an Amtrak ticket for an overnight up to Philly. And before we went to the train station, we went to church that morning. And my husband kind of lollygagged around church and everything. And he was getting on my nerves, going, honey, we got to go. I got to get you on a train by 1:50, actually at 1:30. So we get to the house, and he's dragging about getting his bags together and everything. And I'm like, come on, again, type A personality, guilty as charged. Gotta go. And he's dragging and everything. And I'm thinking, you're going to miss your train. And sure enough, he got there with 10 minutes to spare. If you know anything about Amtrak, they were literally putting the bags on the train when we got there. So we got there just in the nick of time. And so I got him on, kiss goodbye, I'll see you in a couple days, I love you. But then I got driving back from the station, and I realized that's the hardest thing he's ever had to do. He's going up there to bury his mama. And here I am, coming down on him when he's already down. So I got on the phone and I called him and I said, honey, I'm sorry. I did not mean to come after you like that. I mean, I was just worried that you'd miss your train, and then we'd have all manner of, then we'd have to buy a train ticket, and then your brother's going to scream at you. And because I'm the type, I'm always thinking, what if, and that's, again, a stressor. So, he said it was okay, he understood, but it's like, sometimes in life we have to step back and remember what's really important. And I'm saying to somebody who's sick right now, we don't know what in the world's wrong with me, although we have some theories. Here's the thing to remember most. Listen, take care of yourself. Most of you are working for jobs that if, God forbid, you drop dead tomorrow, they'd have you replaced in 2 weeks. But your kids won't replace you in 2 weeks. Your spouse won't replace you in 2 weeks. Your parents won't replace you in 2 weeks. So please take care of yourselves, and, take time off when you need to. Realize it's just a job. Work to live. Don't live to work. And with that, I'll look forward to seeing you in the chat room. Take care.